Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. Good morning and welcome to this one-day conference devoted to the presentation and discussion of the report China in the Security Conundrum of Europe's Southeastern Periphery. It is my great pleasure as the coordinator of today's event to open our proceedings and to extend my warm thanks to all of you for joining us. Our gathering today is both timely and important. Over the past decade, China's growing presence in Europe's southeastern periphery, stretching from the Balkans to the Eastern Mediterranean, has raised new questions for policymakers, analysts, and scholars alike. These questions go far beyond trade and investment. They touch on issues of security, connectivity, strategic dependence, and the shifting balance of influence in a region that has long stood at the crossroads between Europe, Asia, and the wider world. The report we are here to discuss seeks to shed light on precisely this evolving landscape. It examines how China's engagement through infrastructure projects, technology cooperation, and political dialogue and soft diplomacy interacts with the complex security environment of Southeastern Europe, an environment already shaped by EU integration processes, NATO's role, the threats from Russia after the invasion in Ukraine, and the persistent influence of regional actors. Allow me briefly to introduce the authors and contributors who will guide us through these findings. The report is co-authored by Mr. Plamen Tonchev, head of the Asian unit at the Institute of International Economic Relations, and Mr. Vasilis Petropoulos, Associate Researcher at the Institute of International Economic Relations. I would like to congratulate him because he has succeeded at the entrance competition for the recruitment of new diplomats in the Greek Foreign Ministry. I'm sure that he will be a very successful diplomat. Both bring extensive expertise on China's relations with Europe and the broader Indo-Pacific. They are joined by a dedicated team of research assistants, Irini Ellinitaki, Konstantia Mexa, Chrysoula Pythoula. I think one of them is here in the... Huh? Here. Ah, here, hello. Whose meticulous work has enriched the study with up-to-date data, field insight, and contextual depth. We are also honored to have with us Konstantinos Tsimonis, head of the China program at the Institute of International Relations and assistant professor at the Pandion University, Department of International and European and Area Studies, who will serve as our discussant. Mr. Tsimonis was senior lecturer at the King's College of the University of London before moving to Greece. Mr. Tsimonis' comments will no doubt provide a valuable analytical lens through which to interpret the report's conclusions and situate them within broader debates on Europe-China relations and regional security. Today's conference aims not only to present the findings of this important study, but also to encourage a vibrant exchange of views. We hope to foster dialogue among policymakers, academics, and practitioners about how the region can navigate the opportunities and challenges posed by China's growing footprint, while safeguarding its stability, autonomy, and strategic coherence within the European and transatlantic frameworks. In that spirit, I invite all participants to engage actively throughout the date to share your perspectives, raise questions, and to help us collectively refine our understanding of this complex issue. Once again, thank you for being here and for contributing to what promises to be a stimulated and insightful discussion. I would like now to invite Mr. Plamen Tonchev. Mr. Polalis, we have already connected.
Yes, hello.
Who now is not with us, but he is in Taiwan conducting research there. Mr. Tonchev, good evening for you, I think, huh?
Hello. Thanks, Professor Tsoudanidis. I hope the sound is okay.
Yeah, I think so. Do you hear?
Oh, yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks very much. Let me tell you that regrettably, I cannot be with you in Athens, but thanks to modern technologies, I can be present there virtually. And I'm very happy that we are holding this event, as it is the final stage of a huge effort undertaken by the Institute and the research team. And I would also like to thank Vasilis and the 3 research assistants, the 3 Graces, as I call them, Konstantia, Irini, and Chrysoula, for their contribution to this significant research project. And of course, Vasilis, congratulations on your entrance to the diplomatic corps. Let me very briefly tell you a couple of things about the project. Basically, why we launched this project and how we went about it. We started this exercise last January, and we kept collecting data for about 6 months, till June. Next, we spent the summer at the peak of the heat wave, processing the data, double-checking things, and finalizing the text till the publication of the report in late August. In working on this report, we ventured 2 key novelties. First of all, China is very much talked about mostly in terms of its economic heft, and it is seen as both a huge market and a source of investment capital and technologies. We look at it as a security actor or a security quasi-actor, as we argue in the report. And this is in line with the ever-intensifying public debate about the return of geopolitics and the United States-China confrontation on a global scale. And I have to admit that there's nothing revolutionary in this, as in other parts of the world and in Europe, China has been viewed in a geopolitical light for a long time, but not in Greece. It is only recently in Greece that we've started looking at China and thinking about it in geopolitical terms. So this is definitely a novelty by Greek standards. The other novelty of our approach relates to the area that we decided to cover through the research. The region that we call Europe's Southeastern Periphery, or ESEP, is a vast area running from the Western Balkans to the Black Sea Basin down to the shores of the Eastern Mediterranean. And we are fully aware of the fact that ESEP is not an established notion, not an established entity in geography or area studies. So the term could easily be misinterpreted. Yet we insisted on this term for 2 main reasons. First of all, the ESEP region hosts 2 major conflicts that have been on everybody's lips. The conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza. And there are... Is everything okay?
Yeah.
All right. So everybody has been speaking about Ukraine and Gaza, and they happen to be in this vast area that we call ESEP. And there are several other conflicts which are frozen, if not forgotten. And secondly, there's plenty of studies on China's presence in the Western Balkans, in the Black Sea Basin, and the Eastern Mediterranean. So our point is that Europe's Southeastern Periphery has been under-researched as one single region. And all these studies that are available give one a somewhat fragmented understanding of much larger developments. We decided to look at the big picture of this vast and diverse area, precisely because its scale allows us to detect some broader trends and patterns as to China's pursuits in the region. For instance, looking at the larger ESEP region allows us to compare what China is after in countries that have nothing in common, such as Libya or Moldova, or Slovenia and Egypt. And yet, thanks to this approach, we've been able to identify some commonalities in China's pursuits and the playbook of Beijing And otherwise, we would have missed all these developments and all these findings. At the same time, we are fully aware of the inherent limitations to our research, starting from the fact that the ESEP contours are in fact the literal states of the region, the shores of the region. Therefore, our report does not cover significant developments in the broader Middle East, such as the Israel-Iran 12-day war or the Houthis' attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. And we know full well that there have been significant developments over the past few months. So throughout this presentation, we will seek to offer an update that will complete the picture. I do not want to preempt what the team is about to tell you, so I think I'll stop at this point and let me thank you for attending this presentation. Thank you.
Vasily,
Yes.
it's your turn now.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Can we have the PowerPoint presentation, please? Yes.
A little bit louder.
Perfect. Thank you. Can you hear me all right with the microphone? Okay, perfect. So on my end, I would also like to thank Plamen for his guidance and his useful insights that shed some light to my understanding of China and Chinese foreign policy in Europe in general. But I would also like to say a special thank to the three associates, the research assistants, because not only did they provide very necessary, important work and laid the groundwork for what followed, but they had to juggle between their research, their work, and some of them even their professional career. So it was very difficult. They tirelessly worked towards achieving our demands. And of course, their contribution was very special. Of course, they... Oh. I cannot switch the slides. Can you? Here we are. Yeah. Yes, of course, you have already you already know the names of the team. I'm going to get into the details. First of all, before I move to the key findings, because as you already know, the research is very long, very deep, and I'm not going to go into details about the specificities that you can read in the paper. But before I give an account of the key findings, I would like to touch upon what Plamen presented about the added value of this paper. He talked about how we coined the term sub-region that covers the three sub-regions of the Black Sea Basin, the Eastern Mediterranean and the Western Balkans. But some of you might ask, why is this important? I mean, you all know, you're all very experienced, and I guess you can go online and you can search about the different regions, about the bulk of literature that has been provided in terms of Chinese influence in these three areas. But the fact that we treat this geographical space as a contiguous area gives the opportunity to the reader to have an instant comparative analysis and to compare the different tools that China uses in its playbook, because even as we have studied, we see that Chinese policymakers treat these regions as the same in terms of how they use the influence and how they use some tools that we can talk about them later. And of course, as Plamen provided in his analysis, it allows for an identification of broader patterns and trends regarding China's conduct in the region. And I think that's the novelty, as he said, of the research, the first novelty and the main contribution that we want to achieve from this research. Now I'm going to move on. It doesn't want to work for some reason. Yes. Okay, we got it. Yes, so Plamen also talked about China as a security actor. He said he used the word quasi security actor. I would say that we cannot quite yet even describe China as a security actor in the region. I think that there is a departure from the very cautious approach that China has used in Europe because of constraints that have to do with other influential actors like the United States, like Russia. And of course, China remains an economic actor. It anchors its policy in the much touted Belt and Road Initiative, of course, but this departure has occurred over the last decade or so, if I can use a time horizon. And I think that the main tools that China uses now are more visible, especially in countries that are not very closely cooperating with Western institutions. China's playbook of engagement in the security realm of the region includes military-to-military cooperation, port calls, joint military exercises, police enforcement cooperation, and most of them are tools that I would describe them as subtle tools and not hard tools. Hard tools, for example, is the arms sales. That's the very visible tool that it uses, especially with respect to Serbia, for example. We'll talk about arms sales later. But mostly China uses is subtle tools like law enforcement cooperation, like the high-level military meetings, the defense attachés in China's embassies in the ESAP countries are very active, I would say. They conduct day-to-day diplomacy, and this is a very subtle way that goes under the radar, and it can provide an image of how China tries to ramp up its engagement in the security realm of the region. Then, of course, the paper wants to give answers to 4 core questions. The first I touched upon is what kind of tools is China using. The second is what are the drivers of China's policy? What does China try to achieve? Because we know that the main theaters of Chinese influence can be viewed as existing in the Indo-Pacific region, even in Africa, maybe in the Middle East, but not in Europe. So what is China trying to achieve? The other question that we try to respond is what are the factors that constrain China's pursuits in the region? These factors are mostly linked to the relations of China with other powerful actors like Russia, and how China wants to walk a fine line between maintaining these ties, but also promoting its foreign policy in the ESAP region. And the last question is more focused on how regional partners consider China when they have to deal with the security engagement with Beijing. What shapes their perceptions of China, and what drives them to cooperate or even block their engagement with Beijing. And as we move to the key findings of the research, there are a lot, and for those of you who have already read the paper, you understand that it's very difficult to talk in detail about everything, but I think I have collected very indicative source of findings here. The first one that really strikes me, and I discussed this with Plamen a lot, is how some countries use China as a counterweight to other powerful actors. And I can also point to the example of countries like Serbia and Georgia. We know that Serbia is very close to Russia for obviously historical reasons, and also because Serbia is not a member of the EU yet. We know how the current party in Georgia, the Dream Party, has adopted a very pro-Russian stance and charting a course that is widely seen as anti-Western. And this paves the way for a better degree of cooperation between these countries and Russia, but at the same time, these countries do not want to be dependent on Russia. So China provides a very viable alternative. Then we can see this with Egypt as well. Egypt is very close to the West. It has a very comprehensive military partnership with the United States, but again, Egypt wants to play a role of the middle power of a very powerful regional actor in the Eastern Mediterranean, and for this reason, it doesn't want to be held hostage to the shenanigans, if you will, of the American politics. And for this reason, it has up the ante with the engagement with China as well. Ukraine and Moldova are some very significant examples of this diversification of politics, but this engagement with China as an alternative to Russia, of course, has been diminished after the invasion in 2022 because China is widely seen by these actors as an enabler of the Russian invasion. So they have stopped the cooperation to a large degree. Another important finding, it's the significant but often neglected role of domestic politics in ASEP countries. Then we can talk about the example of Greece here. When we had the leftist government that I wouldn't call it anti-Western, but definitely were at loggerheads with the West, we had observed an appetite for closer cooperation with China. This was translated into a lot of naval visits in 2015 and 2017, and even institutionalized cooperation and high-level meetings that continued until even the current government. But now we see a change. We see a change because the current government, for example, has objected the continuation of these high-level meetings. And in 2021, I think, and Plamen knows better about this, rejected the port calls of PLAN. So we see about face of Greece because of the different preferences and foreign policy guides that the current government has taken. It has differentiated its position from the leftist government, the Syriza of the past years. Another example again is Egypt. Egypt had the government under Morsi that was directly linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, which of course caused some alarms to China because of the Uyghur population in Xinjiang and how the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to radicalize the western part of China. After the toppling of the Morsi government, we have seen how Sisi has invested in a strategic partnership with China, a comprehensive strategic partnership. So again, domestic politics has played a big role in either going close to China or cutting ties with China. And another example, of course, again, is Georgia, that I talked about it earlier, about how the Dream Party wants to move closer to Russia and to an extension to China. Then another finding, of course, it's not very surprising, but Russia, Serbia, and Egypt figure as the top China partners in the ASEP region. And this is translated into the hard tools that I talked about later. We've seen a boom in arms sales from China to Serbia and Egypt. We have even seen joint military exercises. I can indicatively cite the Eagles cooperation in 2025, exercise between Egypt and China. And of course, we had the Peacekeeper 2025 joint exercise between Serbia and China, where Serbian troops and police officers traveled to China and trained with the Chinese officials. These are signs of a very deep cooperation between these countries. And of course, China and Russia, we can write another paper about the strategic partnership between Russia and China. Again, I don't have enough time, and Professor Chardaniris is looking at me very alarmingly. But you know, Russia has helped China build its early warning missile system. Russia and China have been engaging in intelligence sharing in the Arctic. They have exchanged sensitive technologies also. And of course, 60% of the foreign-made components that Russia uses in its war against Ukraine have been found to be Chinese-made. So China, for some analysts, is directly helping Russia in its war against Ukraine. So you can imagine how tight this cooperation is and how vital for the Russian economy and Russian strategic machine this cooperation with China stands. Then moving to the next finding is China's multifaceted military diplomacy in SF, which means that China uses a very holistic approach when it comes to military diplomacy. I briefly touched upon the military cooperation, the high-level meetings. We have seen a lot of visits from chiefs of army of the Chinese military coming to countries like North Macedonia, even Moldova, and of course Serbia and Egypt. We have seen how the military attachés in embassies organize the whole receptions, and they invite political figures, prominent political figures, even leaders of countries who join, and they try to talk about institutionalizing the cooperation between the countries. Of course, this is easier when it comes to countries that are not members of NATO or members of the European Union. But China tries to use 5 or 6 different ways to translate this military influence into tangible outcomes, tangible cooperation with countries in the ESEP. Moving to the next slide, yes, it's necessary to talk about China's growing arms production. China used to be an arms importer. Now it has, of course, fundamentally increased its arms production, and for this reason it seeks new export markets, including in Europe and in the ESEP region. This brings China, of course, at loggerheads with countries like Turkey, another country that has a very large now arms production, and it tries to sell its own, for example, its own military aircraft, the Khan 5th generation airjet, for example. But arms sales are a vital way of China's influence in the region. And again, I want to cite Serbia and Egypt. There was a speculation that Egypt is about to buy the J-10 military aircraft from China, which of course alarmed the United States, and there is an ongoing discussion. This deal has not materialized yet, but there are discussions that it might in the future. But it's not only that. Egypt has also agreed to the co-production of drones along with China, and Egypt has also purchased some HQ-9B missiles. It's a missile system that China produces. And it can also want to use this blueprint of the missile system to produce its own missile system. And of course, it's not only about the purchases, but we all need to understand that this creates a very lasting dependency on China, because all these components and all these weapon systems must be upgraded and renewed for years. And of course, all the service and all the works that are needed to operate the system will be held by Chinese experts, Chinese engineers, if these deals continue in the future. So it creates a very big dependency on the part of Egypt on China's arms. Then we have Serbia. We witnessed a very interesting show in Pester in Serbia in 2020. There was a demonstration where Russian bombers were participating in exercise along with Chinese drones, CH-92A drones, and Serbian military. So it was a very interesting show, because we saw on European soil both Chinese and Russian weapon system marching in tandem in Serbia. And of course, it was the first deployment of Chinese drones in Europe. Deployment, I mean, obviously in peacetime and exercise, not something else. But again, it gives a very telling signal of how things are going between Serbia and China. Then I would also like to mention very briefly Turkey. Turkey wants to follow a very independent policy, and it has held a very kaleidoscopic relationship with the West. We know that. But the relations between the two countries now are becoming more antagonistic, exactly because of this competition in arms production. But at the same time, we have a very close cooperation in energy. China has agreed to build some small modular nuclear reactors in Turkey, for example. But when it comes to arms sales, I want to mention a deal in 2013, Turkey was purportedly wanted to purchase HQ missile system from China, but then Rasmussen, the NATO Secretary General, intervened, and this deal didn't materialize at the time. But it showcased how Turkey was willing to buy strategic arms from China in the same way as it has done so with Russia, of course, with the S-400. And then, yes, I would like to, of course, go to the BRI investments that are not only creating a debt trap for countries that get huge loans from China to build infrastructure, but these investments overlap with security considerations when it comes to dual-use infrastructure, that is energy infrastructure, transport infrastructure, and tech. With tech, I mostly mean the surveillance systems. Again, there are a lot of examples. I don't want to tire you. Maybe we can discuss this later. But I would like to cite 2 or 3 examples so that I make my point very clear. First of all, we have the very interesting fact that Romania has been very cautious with surveillance cameras made in China, but at the same time, there is evidence that there are Chinese-made surveillance cameras in at least 23 military sites in Romania, including the Aegis military base that is a NATO base. Then in Ukraine, we have Chinese cameras in the Safe City project and in government buildings in Ukraine, which has raised concerns because we never know if this, if the content in these cameras can be directly accessed by Russians or it can be shared by China with Russians. By China within the context of the no-limit partnership between the 2 countries. Then when it comes to infrastructure, to ports, it's a very hot topic. We know that China now owns stake in ports in the Suez district in Egypt, which gives it a very high degree of control close to the Suez Canal, which is vital for the maritime routes and trade worldwide. Then we know that China owns stakes in Poti, in Georgia, and it wants to upgrade the Batumi and the Anaklia ports in Georgia within the context of the Middle Corridor that starts from China. It connects China to Europe by passing Russia and Iran. It's very interesting to see how this dynamic will develop between China and Russia, because Anaklia is very close to the Russian base in Abkhazia in Georgia, and I'm not sure whether or not Russia is fine with this development. And then I can also talk about the Bar-Bolyare highway that connects the port of Bar in Montenegro to the Serbian capital of Belgrade. It's a very strategic vein, a very strategic route in the heart of Western Balkans, and China has given loans to both Montenegro and Serbia. And of course, we know that in times of crisis, or China can leverage these loans to gain special treatment, special access to the highway. And in the similar vein, we have the Belgrade-Budapest railway that China also has assumed to provide funding for. And last but not least, we have the Piraeus port here in Greece. I know that we're going to discuss in depth about it later because it interests everyone in the room. Greece has been very cautious with Huawei. It has undergone a lot of pressure by the US, both in terms of Huawei and in terms of the management of the port, how transparency works there with the Chinese bureaucracy. But it's interesting to acknowledge that Huawei has been involved in upgrading the internal infrastructure, digital infrastructure of the port, which was again very alarming for our Western allies. And so China has a lot of ways to get involved even in countries with clear Western allegiances, countries that have been very careful. But more of this we will discuss in the future, later in the discussion. Now, the law enforcement cooperation, that's another very subtle way of Chinese influence in Europe. You know, China has used as a justification for this cooperation the large flows of Chinese tourists that flood the European capitals. It has signed agreements with Serbia and Croatia for Chinese officials to move to these countries and conduct joint patrols with local police in order to protect the Chinese tourists, Chinese citizens, or even Chinese investments. And of course, this ostensibly seems benign, but it entails security and human rights risks, and that's because there has been evidence that Chinese may use these patrols and the surveillance systems in these cities to monitor PRC citizens, dissidents who have left China because of pressure from the government, and even to check Uyghurs who have fled Xinjiang to find a better life away from the oppression of the Chinese government. Then there is another issue, not directly linked to the law enforcement cooperation, but very important, and it's the Chinese private companies. Of course, China has not developed yet another Wagner group like Russia, but we have seen another group called FSG. The FSG has been active, very sadly, but active in Libya after 2011, when China had to evacuate its citizens during the crisis. There was this urgency on the part of Beijing to better monitor the developments in volatile environments and be able to better protect its own citizens and its own investments. And of course, under the BRI, there are investments worldwide. To cite an example, in Balochistan, in Pakistan, the majority of workers who get killed from the separatists there are Chinese, and this trend might extend to other countries as well. So China wants to get some tactics from the playbook of Russia, and it is trying to develop a capacity through private companies in order to protect its investments and to protect its own citizens. So it's a trend that we need to watch in the future. Last but not least, the Chinese involvement in peacekeeping that is rather opportunistic. China uses a very beautiful narrative that it's a peacemaker and it has the peaceful rise, and it advocates in favor of countries that are invaded and against entities that want to secede. But it has a very opportunistic attitude. For example, China has sent forces in Lebanon in the peace mission there, but its engagement in terms of Cyprus remains very limited because it doesn't want to get embroiled in something that might ruin its relations with Turkey. Then, of course, it has been very silent in terms of Kosovo. Then again, with respect to Bosnia, China, yes, will never accept the Republika Srpska because it has its own narrative with respect to Taiwan, but at the same time it has been very closely aligned to Russia when it comes to the High Representative for Bosnia in the UN. It has supported Russia's plans to block the renewal of the appointment. So I would say that in terms of the peacekeeping, China is very vocal and has adopted a very peaceful narrative, but in practice it stays aloof to protect its own interests. I'm not going to talk more about the findings. I know that I have surpassed the time, and I want to cede the floor to my colleagues, but some concluding remarks very briefly. China wishes to expand its influence in Asia while avoiding direct confrontation with other security actors. Of course, this notion has permeated my remarks so far. These actors are mainly United States, Russia, and Turkey. With respect to Russia and Turkey, China doesn't want to ruin a strategic partnership that it has developed with both countries. With respect to the US, it doesn't want to start a crisis that it cannot support. And of course, in a region that is not within the vital interest of China. China prefers to maybe draw the line on the sand in the Indo-Pacific, but it wouldn't do the same in Europe. China knows that a more robust security engagement on the European continent will trigger the immediate and harsh reaction on the part of Europe, but mostly on the part of the United States. Then another conclusion is that China, at least for the time being, lacks the military capabilities and the political will to project hard power in the security patchwork of the ESEP. Yes, it's a very big and powerful country. It has increased its arms production, but still it lacks this capacity to emerge as a security actor in Europe. For example, China, of course, doesn't have a permanent military presence in Europe, and when we speak about the larger region, it has one military base in Djibouti, but this base cannot host large vessels that can, in turn, sort of enable China to project power in countries close to the Red Sea. And lastly, all ESEP countries, and that's again a very intriguing fact, that all ESEP countries want to do business with China to varying degrees, even those who are very Western oriented. But they have dialed down their engagement after Western pressure. We have seen that a lot with Bulgaria, with Romania in terms of the Chernovoda nuclear plant, with the Tirana airport in Albania. Deals that were initially signed between the governments of these countries and China, but after US pressure, these countries crumbled, and of course they blocked any deal because they don't want to risk, to endanger their ties with the US, because they know that their economic prosperity and most of all their security is highly dependent on Western institutions and not on China. China will not assume this role. Yes, I'm done. Yes, thank you very much for your attention. And now I will cede the floor to Konstantia, I think, or before that, yeah. 2 words, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petropoulos, for pointing out the key findings of the report. I would like to underline, when I was studying this report, I was aware of the difficulties you have to surmount. First of all, the region of South European Periphery is a huge region. It is consistent of many regions. So using also comparative analysis, which is the most difficult in political science, it was another huge task. And then there were so many issues which deal of China with all these countries all together, and also on the other hand separate states of the region. It was another difficult task. Don't answer now, but I would like from a methodological point of view how you try to surmount all these methodological difficulties. And now I'm giving the floor to Konstantia Mexa.
Exactly.
For 3 to 4 minutes, please.
Yes, of course. So let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Konstantia Mexa, and I'm a recent graduate of the Department of International and European Studies at the University of Piraeus. And this year I had the opportunity to contribute to this report alongside Mrs. Ellinitaki, Mr Petropoulos, and Mr Tonchev. Briefly, we will mainly, as research assistants, focus on the recent developments after the analysis of our indicators from Mr Petropoulos. And me specifically, I will focus mainly on the military diplomacy of China in the Black Sea region. So our analysis emphasized that China's activity in the Black Sea is not about immediate hard power projection. It's about strategic positioning, dual-use access, and political signaling in a region that is shaped mainly by NATO-Russia confrontation and European security volatility. In the report, we underlined that China's support to Russia, particularly through dual-use technology and electronic components, has been central in sustaining Moscow's war capacity despite all these sanctions. So since July, there have been 3 developments that have sharpened and reinforced this assessment. First, China's stance on Ukraine war has hardened. In July, senior Chinese officials conveyed secretly that Beijing cannot allow Russia to lose the war. This marks an evolution from a careful neutrality to a clear geostrategic position. A Russian defeat would free U.S. Resources for the Indo-Pacific, a scenario that, of course, Beijing would like to avoid. So for the Black Sea, this elevates China's engagement from a symbolic diplomacy to a calculated geopolitical hedge, we could say. So the region is no longer just a peripheral commercial corridor. It is embedded, we would say, within China's broader confrontation management towards the United States. Second, U.S. officials have voiced renewed concern over Chinese dual-use transfers integrated into Russian drones and missile systems. This confirms what we also highlight in our report, that almost 60%, if I'm not wrong, of foreign-made components found in Russian systems are either produced in or re-exported through China, including microchips, circuitry, and drone electronics. Third, these dynamics are reshaping regional perceptions of China. For example, countries such as Romania and Bulgaria, Black Sea countries, increasingly view China not just as an investor, but also as a security-relevant actor, whose alignment, even indirectly, with Russia has strategic implications. So we could say that influence sometimes precedes presence when it comes to China. Strategic alignment precedes physical deployment. China does not necessarily need ships in the Black Sea to shape the environment. It is doing it through technology, narrative, and political leverage. So the region now represents a key intersection point between European security pressures and China's global rivalry with the United States. So for European and regional policymakers, the implication is clear. China should not be assessed only through economic lenses. It should also be addressed through security planning, monitoring of dual-use flows, and strategic communication frameworks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mexa. And also we have this brief intervention by Chrysoula Pythoula.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Is the sound okay? Okay, great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present in this conference. I hope you find our research findings interesting. Please pardon my absence. I would love to be able to attend in person. However, my master's obligation keep me here in Paris. But thanks to Mr. Polalis, who is managing the technology and the technicalities of this conference, I will present to you the findings for the area of the Western Balkans. Very briefly, to not take much of your time, I have some latest news from the summer. First, the leaders of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, and Slovakia, Robert Fico, attended a major Chinese commemorative event, which marked the 80th anniversary of the end of the World War II, with a victory over Japan in September 1945. This basically indicates that Balkan leaders leverage the China venue to signal independent foreign policy. They want to show that they have alternative allies in a sector like security, which is dominated by the EU and NATO. The next event that I want to mention is that Serbia's president announced that early elections will be held in order to ease public discontent in this period, which is caused by the Novi Sad railway accident, which happened a year ago, and where 16 people lost their lives due to a canopy collapse in Serbia. And protesters accused the government of negligence and corruption and wanted Vučić to resign. And he said that he will plan the early elections and he will not finish his term, which is due to 2027. And so the last thing I want to mention is that the US lifted the sanctions on Dodik and his network. Milorad Dodik is the leader of the Serbian territory in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and sanctions on him were implemented in 2022, I think, because the US said that he undermined the Dayton Accords, which ended the war in Bosnia in 1995. So though not directly a China deal, This development shifts the regional balance of influence and opens space for non-Western actors, including China. And the US sees this improved stability and economic partnership as motive. That's it for the Western Balkans. Thank you very much.
Thank you. How is the weather in Paris?
It's good, actually. It's good. It's sunny.
She is studying in Sciences Po. So, last but not least is Irini Ellinitaki. Please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ellinitaki Irini. I'm a student at Athens University of Economics and Business in the Department of International European Economic Studies. Thank you for this opportunity to do this. Hope you find our findings useful. I will inform you about the latest developments of the Eastern Mediterranean region, which are plentiful. Various developments over the past few months have disrupted the geopolitical and security balance in the Eastern Mediterranean and the broader Middle East. One of the major events is the news that US President Donald Trump will host Syria's al-Shara in talks at the White House later this month. This should be the first time in decades for a Syrian head of state to visit Washington, according to Al Jazeera and other major outlets, suggesting a potential step toward renowned diplomacy. Iran's regional influence has likewise come under growing pressure, as Iran's network of allied groups and proxies across the Middle East, notably Hezbollah and Houthis, encountered a series of military and political setbacks through coordinated actions by the United States and Israel. Iran's ability to project power may not be compromised, even as it remains active in various civil war theaters. The other major development was the deal with Hamas and the subsequent Sharm el-Sheikh conference. The peace talks that occurred followed a ceasefire and a ground-level agreement to restore peace. Reuters and Xinhua reported that the initiatives were backed by the United States, Egypt, and Turkey, all hoping to support, of course, the ceasefire and prepare conditions for post-conflict governance in Gaza. The success of this session confirmed the new leadership position of the United States and Israel, but also reinforced the cooperating role of the Egyptians and the Turks, even though they had different relationships prior to the conference. In this new context, China's influence in the region has become more limited. Over the past decade, Beijing has primarily focused on economic initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative, infrastructure investments, and selective cooperation with regional partners like Egypt. However, China's role in security and mediation has not expanded, particularly with the United States returning to a more active position and regional countries closely coordinating their efforts with Washington. Beijing remains a major economic partner, but its political and security influence in the Eastern Mediterranean is relatively limited. The current situation, including the anticipated US-Syria talks, the framework of ceasefire in Gaza, and the shifting power dynamics surrounding Iran reflects an ongoing struggle for realignment in the Eastern Mediterranean. This region is witnessing a reconstruction of the roles played by the larger regional powers and their global allies. That's it from me also. Thank you so much.
Thank you, all of you, for your contribution in this report. I know that you have also your obligations in the university, but also at the same time you conducted research. And I would like to congratulate you for the outcome of this report. Now I'm giving the floor to Mr. Tsimonis, to Professor Tsimonis, who will try to comment on this report. As a discussant, it is a very, very important job. Now discuss some points if it is necessary. Please.
Thank you, Professor Tsardanidis, for the invitation, and I would like also to congratulate the authors for their hard work. Whenever there is a new research paper coming out from IDIS, it goes straight on the top of our reading list. So that's what happened with this one as well. Now, my first point relates to the concept, of course, of ESEP, which I think is a very bold move to analytically challenge the traditional regions as we know them. But it's also an absolutely necessary one. And why is it a necessary one? It's because that's what China does. If we keep approaching China from a Eurocentric point of view, and we say, oh, actually this categorization doesn't make any sense, well, we are missing what is actually happening on the ground. And I think that we see again and again, not only now, but for many decades, that China, through its diplomacy, through its multilateral diplomacy, is actually challenging the way the world is organized. Some examples: the Shanghai Security Organization, right, that brings together Central Asia with China, but then now it has already reached down to Turkey and Pakistan. We see that in the case of the 17+1 that drove Berlin crazy, because suddenly it reorganized Europe in a platform that actually suited China. Right? And also it was then flexible enough to include Greece. We also see this in the way that China is rebranding itself as an Arctic power and trying to get in the Arctic Council. So China keeps doing that. They are not fixated to our Eurocentric lenses. So it is absolutely imperative, and I think this is something you can be a bit bolder in your report. I know this is, reconceptualizing a region is something that you always get grilled from reviewers, right, Plamen? But actually, I think this is your main strength here, and it needs to be highlighted. There are also other examples that we see that we can observe how differently China understands the way countries and parts of the world connect with each other. For instance, very recently we had a Chinese Communist Party mission visiting Greece and Belarus. Why not Greece and North Macedonia, geographically speaking? Why not Greece and France, politically speaking? Right? We see that there are different lenses there. We also see that in the way we can observe that in the careers of Chinese diplomats. The previous ambassador here spent time in Iran, Turkey, came to Greece, and he's now in Israel. So it looks like that for the Chinese, it makes much more sense to regroup countries in ways that serve what purpose? Well, they serve the purpose of connecting them to China. So the way China actually understands and reconceptualizes regions has to do about what lines of connectivity it can create with those regions and countries. So that's one point. The second point is that of the domestic politics aspect that Plamen has been arguing that for such a long time, and it is very important, especially since we have some diplomats here, understand from friendly countries. It's very important to understand what countries do through the lenses of domestic politics. I'm very critical of what the Syriza government was doing during 2015-2019. I think we wasted a lot of symbolic and political capital and we didn't actually get anything much in return from China during that period. However, I kept having like Western diplomats who were really worried about symbolic gestures that the Minister of Foreign Affairs was back at the time was doing. So, and always the response to that was, yes, but you need to understand that from the domestic perspective, right? You need to understand that we have been beaten up by, or they consider that we have been beaten up by Europe and the IMF, and now by building all this symbolic and political capital with China, we will be able to gain something out of it, right? So the domestic politics aspect is also extremely important, but also analytically it creates extra work. That's why I think Plamen very wisely created such a big and such a good team to research this question. Now, the third point, and I only have 4 points. The third point is that when does something constitute a threat and when it doesn't? So when can we say that a really banal activity of military diplomacy is something that we should be worried about? Okay, it's very easy, and we know that our allies, our good friends from the other side of the Atlantic, very often they take small examples left and right, and they create this massive threat kind of perceptions. But I think there is a reason there to worry about, and there is something that we need to have in mind when we engage in this kind of military diplomacy. And that is that we tend to underestimate or consider such activities as something, obvious, but actually they contribute to something. They contribute to perception. They contribute to preventing perceptions of danger or perceptions of threat in the public opinion, but also in policy circles from arising. Okay, I put aside obvious issues of espionage and things like that, right? But it's very important that when you get to see, when you get to see those officers when they come, and they always come mixed gender teams, right? And they are very polite, and they bring all the presents and so on. They cultivate an impression to the other side that actually we are not the army that has invaded the South China Sea and created islands out of the blue. We're not the army that is ready to attack Taiwan. We're not the army that has committed various atrocities in the domestic, within China. Okay, taking the case of as I call it, the Chinese Polytechnic, the 1989 uprising, as an example, right? So they're normalizing themselves, okay, through all these activities. Now, what is the response to that? Should we stop them all? Should we cut off any contact? Now, and the fourth issue, and I'll come back to this question, has to do with law enforcement. Law enforcement is all about, and cooperation is all about extradition treaties. That's what China wants. China wants to be able to force countries to hand over people who are accused of corrupt activities, or people who are dissidents and are accused for corrupt activities in order to be deported, right? So I think this is a key element in their law enforcement kind of cooperation, and of course, cooperation in surveillance infrastructure. There are issues of digital security there. But law enforcement, I will finish with that, raises a more complicated question. So when we do not share the same understanding of the rule of law with a country, can we really cooperate with them in the realm of law? When we don't share the same understanding about the freedom of speech, can we cooperate with them in the realm of the media? Okay. When we don't share the same understanding of academic freedom, can we cooperate with them in universities, in education. Okay, now I'm against black and white answers. However, we need to be careful. Okay, I don't think decoupling is the answer to all these things, but also it is not being willingly naive, as we have been, I think, for many years in this country. So that's all from me.
Thank you very much for these 4 points about the concept of ESCP, the whole region which studies the report, about the influence of domestic politics, about the threat perceptions, and both law of enforcement, which is it's very useful if we have in our consideration about the human rights issue. I think we have to include in law enforcement the human rights issue, which is which the Chinese government does not like to discuss for many reasons. Now, I would like to open the floor. We have some time for the discussion. Please raise your hands and identify yourself. Please. The gentleman. Yes.
Hello, I'm Stathis Kardas. I'm assistant professor.
The microphone.
Thank you. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Athens, the Department of Political Science and Public Administration. Thank you very much for the very interesting remarks and the very interesting research that was done about the whole project. I would like to point out an issue that was raised in the discussion, which I think might be adding to the future report on that issue, which has to do with what China is trying to do. If we adopt the perspective of what China is trying to do, because you were very good at presenting our understanding about what China is trying to do. However, and I understand the analytical divide between security and economics. It makes sense, but China uses specific argumentation about its external presence in this particular issue in this part of the world. What is that? It has to do, I think, mainly about economics and export of productive capacities. And if that is the case, then I'm not sure whether it's a choice whether we will engage with the Chinese or not. You know, but maybe if they can indeed build a car that now costs from a German manufacturer costs 40,000 euros, and they can sell it in the European market for 10,000 euros, then you know, it's not in our hands. And of course, if qualities are comparable, etc. So it might be interesting to adopt a view about what China is trying to do and link it with your broader understanding. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to ask how many questions we have from the floor for the time being. One. Yes, Mrs. Diamantopoulou. Yeah. Okay, so I collect two now, and then we shall continue after trying to answer.
Thank you. I'm Anna Diamantopoulou, president of the Dictio, and we close cooperate with IDIS. Of course, history is a hostage of geography. And so I understand I try to understand the way you work, because it's very difficult methodology, Slovakia and Egypt and Georgia. It is not very clear to me the conclusion. Finally, do you believe that China has a concept that all this area is an holistic approach, and they have a strategy for this. And if this is the case, do you believe that their plan of investments in ports, in trains, in bridges, in roads, and everywhere, IDIS has presented a few years ago the investment, at least in Balkans, do this investment link with the military strategy? Because to my point of view, I don't believe that China wants to be a military power, first military power in the world. I believe that they more want to be the economic power in the world, not the military power. And in this case, do we believe that this military strategy is, you spoke about a threat. Is it a threat, or is it part of the economic strategy? Produce arms to find new markets, etc.
Thank you very much. Very interesting question. Please identify yourself. It's your turn.
My name is John Psaropoulos. I'm Al Jazeera's correspondent in Southeast Europe. We've been reading unattributed reports in the Greek media, and we've been hearing this also from American think tankers about the United States now under Trump pushing to dislocate China from its Piraeus investment. But it's my understanding that COSCO is under a 35 plus 5-year contract, which takes it to 2056. And I hope Plamen will correct me if I'm getting my numbers wrong. How does a country that's really struggling to attract foreign direct investment by establishing rule of law perform that feat?
Okay. I give the chance now to the authors and Mr. Tsimonis, if he likes to respond. Mr. Tonchev, please. Did you hear the questions?
Yes, I did. If you allow me some very brief comments on the comments, because I think they were really precious and very much useful. And then I'll get back to the questions just as briefly. First of all, on the concept of ESEP, and I'm very thankful to Kostas Tsimonis. Yes, it's a bold but necessary concept because indeed, this is how the Chinese think. And I suppose this already answers one of the questions about whether or not we are in a position to understand, how the Chinese think. We do have to enlarge, these entities and get closer to the Chinese way of thinking. And in fact, I think that just like the Chinese speak of themselves as a near-Arctic country, which is ridiculous, I think that perhaps Greece could present itself as a near-Indo-Pacific country, given that it has a huge commercial fleet which sails all the seas and oceans on a global scale, including in the Indo-Pacific. Why not think the Chinese way, all right? And present Greece as a near-Indo-Pacific power. The other point is on peacekeeping. Indeed, and I fully agree with what Vasilis said previously, China has acted opportunistically. Just think of this. A year ago, 2 years ago, China presented itself as a major mediator between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this major achievement has now fizzled out, okay? Last year, China hosted 14 Palestinian factions in Beijing. This has now fizzled out. And if you look at the Gaza peace deal, whatever, and the summit chaired by Trump, China is nowhere to be found, all right? I mean, I'm saying this for the record. Yet another point that I noted is that law enforcement, and I fully agree again with Kostas, this is a very subtle sector and area of cooperation with China, which goes under the radar. And there are very many implications and ramifications, and we should pay attention to that. And the last comment, of course, would be that on Greece. Back in 2016, the Syriza government, in March 2016 to be precise, signed a military cooperation agreement with China. This agreement is still in force. The last Chinese military delegation came to Athens last year in 2024, all right? Which means that, of course, for the sake of continuity, the current government may not be in a position to cancel the agreement, but in fact, it is still implementing it. All right, I'm telling you this for what it's worth. Some very brief comments on the questions that were raised. I do not quite understand the argument about cheap Chinese cars. Yes, this is true, but I thought we were talking about China as a security actor in this particular research. To what Mrs. Diamandopoulos said about China, whether or not it has a strategy for ESEP, for the region we are discussing here, yes, it does. It does. The very fact that Piraeus is meant to link the maritime Silk Road with a terrestrial route through Kazakhstan, Russia into Central Europe. This means that the Chinese are thinking big, and they do look at the map. So they do look at the map of Eurasia at large, and not just tiny little regions and sub-regions. The other question raised by Anna was, does China want to be a military power in ESEP? No, it doesn't, and it can't be a military power. This is not a priority theater for China. The priority theater for China is where I'm sitting now, in Taiwan. It's the South China Sea, it's the East China Sea, it's the Western Pacific, it's not the East Mediterranean, it's not the Balkans. No, they do not want to be a military power in our region, but they are involved in security in very many ways. And the last question raised by John, the contract on Piraeus is in force till 2052. Because the initial contract, which was 35 years long, was amended to a 40-year contract in 2012 by the Samaras government. All right. Thanks very much.
Okay. Mr. Petropoulos.
May I intervene for a couple of minutes, because I don't want to leave any questions, any questions unanswered. I don't know if this microphone works. Okay, now it works. It takes some time. So to the question of the assistant professor, because you asked what is China trying to do and how China is portraying itself with regards to Europe and what can we do, and you mentioned the example of the electric vehicles, if I remember correctly, and how the price is much lower and how this might cause a blow to the antagonism of European producers. And you said that it might not be in our hands, but I would point out that it is in our hands. It's in the hands of the European Union, because this edge that China has right now in terms of the electric vehicles specifically comes from unfair trade practices. It comes from the degradation of environmental standards, and all these issues has to be dealt with on the European level. There has been steps that have been taken from the European Union. There is the carbon border adjustment mechanism that tries to offset this difference in pricing because the European producers are very keen on observing these standards, and of course this increases the price of their products. So in other fields as well, Europeans can deal with these issues because this edge of China does not come from a comparative advantage, but it comes from the degradation of environmental standards, the degradation of human rights standards as well. So it is in our hands, and China, yes, portrays itself as a partner, as an economic partner, as a peaceful riser. And we can believe that in part, but when it comes to to bad practices. We need to deal with China heads-on, and of course we need to have a more active stance that the European Union is doing right now, a little bit lately, but it's doing it. Now to the question of Ms. Diamantopoulou, whether or not China has a strategy. You know, there are two answers to that confirm that China does have a strategy with respect to what it's doing in the ISEP region. First of all, we can just see the record. We can just see how this systemic investment is happening over the last decade or so in all these ports, and how Plamen mentioned this connection between the Middle Corridor and the Silk Belt and Road Initiative. So there is this conceptual element that if we observe very attentively, we can argue that there is a coordinated strategy, but to have a better point founded in some evidence. I can point out to the defense paper. I think Plamen can chime in if he wants, but it's the defense paper of 2015, and there was a clear statement there that China has to be strategic with the investments in infrastructure and try to explore the possibility of developing military capacities in this infrastructure. And I don't remember the exact phrasing. Plamen, if you remember, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, if I can clarify this, in the 2015 white paper on China's defense, there's this clause that all the newly built commercial ships should be easily convertible into warships.
Exactly. Yeah, I knew that he remembered that because we discussed it together. And of
Sorry.
Yes, Plamen. Yeah.
To explain a little bit more. To elaborate a little bit more. From Plamen. Yeah, Plamen, did you hear?
No, sorry, what's the question?
Ms. Diamantopoulou asked you if it's possible to elaborate a little bit more this argument about the transformation of the commercial merchant ships to boats to
Indeed.
warships.
The idea is, and it is enshrined in the 2015 defense doctrine of China, that all the newly built Chinese commercial ships should be designed in a way that would allow them to be easily converted into warships, meaning that there should be a provision in their design that weapons could be easily added. That's the idea. Is that clear?
Which essentially means, of course, that if commercial ships from China dock to these ports in the Adriatic Sea or Eastern Mediterranean, they can easily turn into military vessels. And of course, this turns this infrastructure into dual-use infrastructure. It's a very interesting topic. And to end this reply to Ms. Diamantopoulou's comment, Xi Jinping himself has also stated in some instances this desire that is enshrined in the 2015 defense paper, and there is a very specific bureau within the Foreign Ministry of China that deals with these issues of overlapping of the overlap between commercial and military use. I think it's the Military Cooperation Bureau. There is an acronym. Chinese have a lot of acronyms, so I apologize that it's blinking right now. But there is both a structured approach in terms of this overlap between commercial and military use, and of course there is this evidence if a researcher observes the steps, the coordinated steps that China has been taking in the region over the last decade.
Okay. Mr. Tsimonis, would you like to comment?
Yes, just a couple of very brief comments. So first of all, when we talk, on the questions on what does China want, essentially, I think to begin with, we need to question the very term China. What does China mean? Is China an actor? No, the actor is the Chinese Communist Party, right? And it is, by definition, also an international actor. So the Chinese Communist Party wants to survive in order to survive. It needs to produce material wealth and make sure that it's distributed as fairly as possible among the Chinese people, but it also needs to deliver to the nationalist dream of reunification. In many ways, it is the Chinese Communist Party is prisoner of its own nationalism. And for that to happen, of course, Plamen needs to be bombed and occupied very quickly. So this is something that will always be there, and it will be a key point in their relations with, in their perception of their relations with the U.S. Because of course the U.S. is the number one major power that prevents them from doing that. Okay, of course, I'm sure the Taiwanese army is very brave and so on, but it will be very difficult to defend Taiwan without the U.S. What China is doing in terms of public diplomacy, I guess, military diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, educational diplomacy, blah, blah, blah. What they are doing is that they are breaking up this perception of China being a threat to anything more than the US. And they have been doing that in Europe very effectively. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is an exhausting organization to be in. Why? Because you have to study all the time. They have exhausting study sessions. And the first time I was in China in 2003, I was dragged into a party study session on the lessons of the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, they have studied the Soviet history and the fall of the Warsaw Pact very closely. And one of their major conclusions is that transatlantic unity was a key component in making the Soviet Union lose the Cold War. So yes, they know that if they push the Europeans and the US to the same direction, and if the perception of the US of China as a threat and the perception of Europe of China as a threat actually merge, then they will have a very difficult opponent in front of them. So they're quite careful. They have been building that bridges for many years, and they have tried. They have been successful in basically us discussing of whether China is a threat or not. Okay, I'm not saying it is, by the way, but it is interesting that we keep discussing in Europe and we say, oh, perhaps this is an American problem, or why should we have a German warship in the Taiwan Straits, right? So I think they're very successful in that regard. Now, regarding Piraeus, when there is a will, there is a way, I would say. The EU has signaled, it has been laying the infrastructure, the legal infrastructure for this to happen. If we want to come up with a scenario, it is possible to do that. But I doubt that in the end, the equilibrium that now sustains COSCO in Piraeus will move so radically to that direction. I don't think so. The ship-owning elite has stakes in it. Part of it has been very supportive of it. I don't think they will just let it slip. But it's also a good opportunity for us to address the many issues of governance that relate with the port. I mean, you know the Calypso operation in the port now. We have 2,500 containers being held up. There are issues of smuggling, there is issues of drug trafficking. So I think from the Greek side, what we need to do, and also to ease the pressure from the Americans, would be to improve governance in the port.
Thank you, Mr. Tsimonis. I'll take a second round of questions.
One moment.
But would you like to?
Yes, so to ask or like to point out something out of the argument of Professor Tsimonis. If I may flip your very lucid insight about the Cold War dynamics and the current dynamics, would you say that the West should also be careful not to drive closer together China and Russia? Because in the Cold War, Cold War was marked by the Sino-Soviet split, which in turn facilitated the defeat of the Soviet Union. So in the current dynamics, you said that China is very careful not to unite the West against against it in a more dynamic way. But would the same hold true about the reverse outcome?
Okay. In order to support Mr. Tsimonis' argument, take the example of multilateralism. I mean, the triangle of Europe, China, United States. China is a very firm supporter of multilateralism in international economic fields, which also Europe is. Meanwhile, the United States have a different direction. So this is a clear example of what China tries to achieve. Would you like to comment?
Perhaps I would like to make a small comment.
Okay.
It's actually very similar to what Mr. Tsimonis said. I
Very
would actually,
brief, please,
yes.
Because we have no time.
Regarding to how much we should perceive China as a threat, I would say that we should look in general historically about this revisionist stance that China has towards its external relations, this nationalism that is embedded within the external relations of the country, and how it sets long-term goals, I would say, and we see them throughout the years. That's why there has been all this research behind all the objectives that the Chinese officials are setting since the beginning of the century. That's what I would say.
Thank
very
you.
briefly.
We have about 10 minutes, so I'm going to collect all the questions now, which are, how many are? Yes. And I saw another hand, Mr. Petropoulos. So would you like to ask something? Okay, so you have covered. So we have only one question. Please.
Hi, so if I may,
And if it is possible, because it is late, if you like to which of the panel, of the person of the panels is addressed this question?
Whoever can answer it, actually,
No.
to be honest with you. If I may, since I'm the last person, no one else wants to
Please
ask.
identify yourself.
I will. I just like to ask two questions if I'm the only person asking. I'm Evangelos Ipsos. I'm a CGTN correspondent in Southeastern Europe as well. One of my questions, really quick, that the report suggests, actually, that the Chinese dual-use infrastructure creates this strategic vulnerability in the region. But yet, we haven't seen a single case of that kind of vulnerability here in this part of Europe that coerces a government, for example, something that interferes into governments. If so, whether that's infrastructure or telecom, I would like, if you can, someone can answer that, if there's any evidence, because so far we haven't seen any. And on the other question, speaking about arms deals, actually, it's quite interesting hearing about that, because China is a very small fraction of arms deals when it comes to the US, Russia, or even other European countries here in this region specifically. So I would like to know, what is the narrative on it? Is it because Beijing is an upcoming power? It is a way to cut competition, just like they're doing with 5G networks in this region. And if so, it is legitimate threat here in this part of the world. Please give me the baseline of it and how so. Thank you.
Okay. Plamen, of course. Petropoulos. Okay.
For the second part, yeah.
Please, Plamen.
All right, shall I?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I heard all the questions, but on the basis of what I took down, I think is China, well, I suppose, Professor Tsardanis, you spoke about China as a supporter of multilateralism, which it is, of course, because China is the country or the economy that has benefited the most since its accession to the WTO in 2001. And it has really made strides, and it grew spectacularly over the past more than 2 decades now, thanks to its accession to the WTO. So yes, China definitely is a supporter of multilateralism, but I would say that with the passage of time, it's become more of a supporter, I would say, of globalization with Chinese characteristics. with Beijing basically dictating the terms. And we can see this now with China's overcapacity, China literally flooding the world with its excess capacity because it cannot absorb its own industrial output. On something that Vasilis raised, I'm not quite sure I heard his point, but I think that indeed the Sino-Russian tandem, which seems to be unbreakable, is a serious issue that we cannot neglect. So in a way, it does remind one of the transatlantic unity at the time of the Cold War. This time, we've got a similar configuration or constellation on the part of Russia and China. On the last question about arms deals, I think it's quite fair. It's fair enough to say that indeed there's fierce competition between arms producers, Russia, the United States, Europe, China, of course. I would say that China is, of course, claiming its own share of the pie. And it hasn't been growing spectacularly, but it has been growing. I would say that the Chinese have been really encouraged with the success of their J-10C jet fighter in the recent India-Pak clash. And they've been trying to sell it elsewhere. Not very easy, but it is an item that's become attractive, I would say. What I find a lot more worrying and certainly controversial is that Chinese weapons or Chinese components seems to be making inroads into the ESEP region, either in Gaza or in Libya or in Ukraine, through clandestine channels. And this is something that should be monitored very closely. Thank you.
Mr. Petropoulos,
yes, and to the last point of Plamen, and this is not accounted for like in the official data, so it's very difficult to track it. And you were right about your second argument that yes, now in terms of volume maybe or value, because I'm not sure what you meant about that China is a fraction of exports from Russia, and you meant in terms of volume or so. Yeah, exactly. So this is right. But first of all, this paper focuses on the trend. So we want to detect the trend, and China is entrenching itself so that it increases more its exports in the future. So it's just the trend to watch out for. And secondly, I would point out to the qualitative element of the arms sales. So it's not only about the volume and the price, but it's also the strategic value. These weapons that we're talking about, like the military aircraft or the missile system, are strategic weapons, and this, of course, creates a much bigger issue for Western allies than it would cause, for example, just ammunition. So at the initial stage, we're focusing more on the qualitative element of the strategic element that these weapons have, but at the same time we have detected a trend that might lead to a more robust military partnership between China and these countries in the future.
Okay, I think now it's 2:50, huh? We started at 12:30. I would like to thank you, Mr. Tsimonis, for accepting our invitation to comment as discussant, Mr. Petropoulos, Mr. Tonchev from Taiwan, and of course, our ladies, Irini Ellinitaki, Konstantia Mexa, and Chrysoula Pythoula. Thank you very much for your participation. Of course, all of you who stayed so late until this hour. And thank you very much.